Good evening. I'm Larry King, and there's the president outside of Tiananmen Square, where he will proceed into this official arrival in the Chinese land that he has visited, the first time any American has been near that area, Tiananmen Square, in 9 years. This is a special edition of Larry King Live. Wolf Blitzer is at that scene. Bernie Shaw, who was there 9 years ago, he was the last anchorman on the air. He was they pulled the switch on Bernie 9 years ago, and then everything was gone. There is President Clinton greeting dignitaries. Where, Wolf Blitzer, where are you now? We have a panel that's assembled. I'll introduce them to you, gentlemen. They are Harry Wu. He is with us here in Los Angeles. He's the famous Chinese dissident, probably the most famous. He's executive director of the Laogai Research Fund. In Boston is Chai Ling, a Chinese dissident who was present at Tiananmen Square that terrible day 9 years ago. In Wilmington, Delaware is Senator Joseph Biden, Democrat of Delaware, ranking member, the ranking Democrat on the Foreign Relations Committee, who staunchly favors this trip. And in San Francisco, Congressman Nancy Pelosi, Congresswoman Pelosi, is a ranking member of the House Foreign Affairs Appropriations Subcommittee, a member of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. What is your reaction so far, Harry, to what we've seen?
Well, I think the Chinese government was quite clever, and they didn't show any picture related to Tiananmen Gate.
Are they controlling the pictures?
Yeah. They really saved the face for the Clinton.
We'll take a break.
Second thing, the Li Peng didn't show up.
He wasn't there?
He wasn't there.
You
Third surprise. Yeah, he wasn't there.
We'll discuss that and a lot of other things with our panel. Get into the full session of Larry King Live right after this. We're back on Larry King Live on this historic night. That's the shot in Beijing. The president has arrived. The opening ceremonies have taken place, and he is in the Great Hall for meetings with the Chinese leaders, along with members of his cabinet, Secretary of State, along with him on a very warm Saturday morning in Beijing. And there's the Great Hall as we pass through. Let's ask Chai Ling, our Chinese dissident who was a student leader at Tiananmen Square. She's in Boston. Does this feel eerie to you? How do you feel watching this?
Oh gosh, I can't even begin to describe it. You know, 9 years ago, that exact same night, I was at Tiananmen Square and gathering at the Monument of People's Hero, where the picture deliberately avoided that spot. That would be the usually place where the president would go. And watching the tanks and troops moving towards us and shooting at us randomly. There was a bullet went by my ear, just really half foot away. And otherwise, I wouldn't be here with you, Larry, today.
Did you have any warning that that would happen?
No, we had rumors and warnings of crackdown, but nobody had ever expected the real crackdown to be so brutal and so bloody and so terrible.
Where were you that day, Harry?
I was in the United States.
Were you shocked?
I was shocked. I was surprised today the second leader of this country, Li Peng, disappeared in this view.
Bernie, what do you make of that? That's the leader who ordered the raid. He's not there, according to Harry.
Well, they hide him. They have to hide him. That was a smart decision on their part. However, where the red carpet, President Clinton and Jiang Zemin walked upstairs to the Great Wall has an amazing meaning as well. That's where the movement was started in many ways. The student went to ask for the People's Congress, which is equivalent to the Capitol Hill, the Congress in this country, to start reform. And they're being ignored and beaten up. And the student knelt down in front of that exact gate where President Clinton and Jiang Zemin disappeared, and for reform. That started the movement.
Senator Biden, I know you're a strong supporter of this trip, but after you hear what you hear, do you have some doubts about us honoring this by visiting them?
Well, I don't view it as honoring, Larry, and I can't possibly do anything other than empathize and feel the same sense of almost revulsion that your two dissident guests who are nationally known feel. But you know, it seems to me that the President of the United States gets paid to protect American interest and promote American values. And it seems to me the choice here is, the proof will be in the pudding in what he says and how he says it, but the notion of not engaging China, the notion of not engaging them by visiting is, it seems to me, to be counterproductive to our interest as well as our values.
And Congressman Nancy Pelosi in San Francisco, what would you add to what Joe Biden just said?
Well, I have the greatest respect for Senator Biden. Probably no one in the Congress has done more to establish Radio Free Asia than he has done. But I respectfully disagree with his characterization of those who may disagree with the president's policy. We certainly want to engage China diplomatically, politically, in every way, but we want it to be honest engagement that recognizes our differences, effective engagement that produces some results, and sustainable engagement that sustains our own economy, international security, and our values.
Are you opposed to this trip?
No, I don't disagree with the presidents of our two countries exchanging visits. I believe, though, that a summit, as this is called, if something is raised to the level of a summit, it should have serious results. And at the beginning of the planning, it was hoped that the Chinese would sign the Missile Technology Control Regime to stop their proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, that they would be preparing to join the World Trade Organization and comply with fair trade laws, and that they would free the prisoners arrested at Tiananmen Square. My overwhelming thought when watching the president was, here's the President of the United States reviewing the troops on the edge of Tiananmen Square, the same troops that now brutally occupy Tibet, continue to proliferate weapons of mass destruction, and continue to crush dissent in China. Until the dissidents who are arrested for expressing themselves freely about political and religious freedom, etc., until they are freed and until they are allowed to speak freely in China, I think that a celebratory kind of a trip of this kind would more appropriately be, should more appropriately be one that is much more focused on issues and less on the travel laws.
I gotta take a break, and when we come back, we'll bring our whole panel in. This is Larry King Live. Don't go away. Harry Wu, as we look again at the scene Saturday morning in Beijing. It is humid and a hot day, but at least some wind is blowing, as you can see the furling American flag. Harry Wu, are you in support of this trip?
Well, Clinton said that we have to go over there, engage with them. And Senator Biden said we have to protect our business interests over there.
I didn't say business interests.
But right now, the problem is, do you believe that economy booming in China can buy over the totalitarian system? It seems to me you try to convince a tiger become vegetarian.
You're saying don't go?
Yeah, I think she should not go.
Not go?
Not to go, especially in the Tiananmen Square. This is a historical mistake.
Bernie, do you feel double-edged about it? I know you're a journalist and you have to cover everything, but you were there. You saw what happened 9 years ago. You didn't have it from Ling's desperate standpoint, but you certainly had it. What do you think?
Well, this is strictly a personal opinion. Right. The carnage, the massacre that happened 9 years ago in that very square is unforgivable. It's a historical fact. Also, a historical fact is the importance of China. And I think the President of the United States remaining in Washington would be a very serious mistake, not only for this country, but also for other countries, the industrialized nations of the world, and for peace in the world.
Ling, what do you think?
Well, first of all, I want to salute to Bernard, and I appreciate it, and thank you so much for the international journalist crew to be like you, be there and cover the media and let the world know what happened back in 1989.
Thank you.
And you're welcome. Secondly, I believe the same point you just expressed, President Clinton should go, engage China, however, don't do appeasement. Right now, he's on a very thin line to do appeasement, just calling with the dictator, shaking hands with the dictator, not meeting the dissident, not meeting the reformer leader Zhao Ziyang, who lost his freedom, still under house arrest 9 years
Senator,
later.
all right, very good point. Senator, why didn't he do that? Why didn't he see everybody, or did the Chinese control all this?
Well, I'm sure he can't. Look, Larry, one of the things, Nancy and I don't disagree. We've been allies in this for a long time. I am the guy that authored Radio Free China in the Senate and got it passed through the Senate. I'm the guy who asked for secret sessions of the Senate to try to cut off MFN when China was proliferating missiles to Pakistan. So we don't disagree. The question is, everybody gave their laundry list of all that has to be done. Does anybody think that can be accomplished in one single visit? In the meantime, here we have South Asia falling apart with India and Pakistan Pakistan, which China has to play a part in the solution to that. We have the Korean Peninsula, where China plays an incredibly important role. They can be very destabilizing if they wish to be. We have the question about them devaluing their currency if they choose to do that. We have the question of whether or not they are going to continue to refrain, as they've only recently begun, from engaging in the transfer of missiles. We have the human rights issues, which are real and serious. Now, the proof in the pudding in this will be, in my view, is how the president conducts himself. Does the president, when he comes out, make any reference or mention? Does the president, when he's at Beijing University, speak forcefully about what our values are, as well as our common interest and our different values? And so the question, this is a process. And if you were concluded that nothing happened between 9 years ago and now, it all was negative from
Senator,
that point on, it's a different deal.
Senator, I got to take a break. If he doesn't say anything strong, will you be disappointed?
Will you be disappointed? And I'll be, quite frankly, think it's a mistake.
And you'll hear all those remarks as well. We'll take a break and come back with our complete panel assembled. We'll ask Wolf for any update outside and more of Bernie and Harry and Chai Ling and Senator Biden and Representative Pelosi. I'm Larry King. Don't go away. As we come back, we now have live pictures into Tiananmen Square, and Wolf Blitzer is there. The square is now open, I would gather.
Well, basically, life is returning to normal outside of the Great Hall of the People at Tiananmen Square. You're seeing this live picture where people are beginning to walk through. They had cleared out this entire square once President Clinton's arrival ceremony, the hours before President Clinton's arrival ceremony. But now it's opened up on buses and individuals riding bicycles. And the traffic you see in the distance, that's one of the main thoroughfares. It was there, Larry, where the incident occurred in June of 1989. Everyone remembers, of course, where that individual stood in front of that Chinese tank. It was where you're seeing the traffic in the distance, not very far from where I am standing, which is right outside the Great Hall of the People, where the formal arrival ceremony occurred. And I got to tell you, Larry, they've already rolled up the red carpet here. They're finishing up the process. Life is beginning to get back to normal here at Tiananmen Square.
Let's reintroduce our panel. Harry Wu, the Chinese dissident, executive director of the Laogai Research Fund. He's based in San Francisco. He's with us here in L.A. In Boston is Chai Ling, the Chinese dissident who was a student leader at Tiananmen Square and is lucky to be with us. In Wilmington, Delaware, Senator Joseph Biden. In San Francisco, Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi. In Beijing, as we've already established, Wolf Blitzer. And in Washington, Bernie Shaw, the co-anchor and the co-host of CNN's Newsstand, airing Sunday and Monday nights. He's our senior co-anchor, and he was at Tiananmen Square right about when we were on the air, when he was just snapped off that night, just cut off. Are you optimistic, Harry, about this trip?
I don't think there's a significant result will happen. Clinton policy, not at all. Clinton policy, if not followed by the step-by-step to strange and only based on commercial interest, this appeasement policy. Appeasement never make peace and never improve human rights in that country.
Bernie, this president, though, this American president, is very good at communicating. Do you expect his personality to be in the forefront here?
Oh, his personality is very much part and parcel of the man himself. But I think we should remember, and I point out to Harry, that American presidents, the past 4 or 5 Americans who've occupied the White House and leading this great country, have had almost identical policies when it comes to dealing with the People's Republic of China. There's been a voice of unison coming out of Washington, and there's been a reason for that. We know what the reasons are. And I would also like to point out that in my judgment, the leaders of China are going to do whatever they think is in their best interests. When it comes to yielding, when it comes to releasing some dissidents, whatever it is, they're going to do what's in their best interests, as the leader of this country does. The leaders in our Congress, they have this country's best interest at heart. And what encourages me is economic prosperity. What's happening in Hong Kong, what's happening in other provinces. And you got to remember that economic progress is very contagious, very infectious. When people start producing more, they start demanding more. There's no way the Chinese government is going to be able to stop what is happening in that great country.
Wolf Blitzer, is the mood Wolf, is the mood of the American contingent optimistic?
I wouldn't say they're optimistic, Larry. They were very concerned. In our first stop in Xi'an, there were reports that the Chinese police were picking up dissidents, arresting individuals, outspoken individuals, in anticipation of the president's visit in that ancient Chinese capital. They've released a few of them since then, but other dissidents have been picked up. This is seen by the president's national security advisor, Sandy Berger, and other top aides to the president as marring what was supposed to be a very celebratory visit here. And the fact that it was started by the arrest of some dissidents was not the mood that the White House certainly had wanted. It was something, in fact, the exact opposite. Officials do point out, officials traveling with the president say that perhaps that's also one reason why President Clinton's not planning on actually meeting with any dissidents. They were afraid, they say, that if the president were to sit down with a prominent dissident or two here in China, that those dissidents would almost certainly be arrested, perhaps even as a preemptive step. And they say the president did not want to be responsible for the arrest of more dissidents.
Chai Ling, do you buy that?
I do not buy that. I read the Chinese newspaper, and all the Chinese dissidents signed an open letter to President Clinton saying, if we are not afraid of our own life, what should you be afraid of? That is the spirit, fight, struggle for freedom and democracy. I respect Congressman Joe Biden. I appreciate your great effort to promote Radio Free Asia. But just on this particular trip, meeting dissidents is not just one of more item on the laundry list. It's the most important thing to start with, because without political reform, China is not going to be able to join the WTO and stop nuclear non-proliferation. This dictatorship will not allow to let that happen.
Senator Biden, is it rude to criticize your host when you visit his city?
The answer is yes, but you should look. I think Chai Ling makes a point. I think that my criticism of the administration generally here is, let me give you a specific example. They had a forum at the United Nations whereby it was totally appropriate to criticize China for its human rights violations. I promoted him. I urged the president to do that, and the Foreign Relations Committee tried to get that moved and done, and the president refused to do that. I think that is a serious mistake. I think the president is not being aggressive enough. But that is not to suggest, as some have in the Congress, and I wasn't implying that Nancy thought the president shouldn't go. There are some, though, on the Senate side who argue that it is wrong to engage by going, period, to China. And that's what I was responding to. My criticism of this administration is, I think they've been a little bit too timid in terms of their criticism of the human rights violation. But I would make the larger point. And if I were Chai Ling, I would take the position she took. But there's other issues as well. No one thinks that a single visit can change the human rights circumstances in China. But a single visit that is mishandled can cause a devaluation of the currency, which can cause serious problems for the United States of America.
Let me get a break. Let me get a break, and we'll come back with more. Don't go away. Life at a normal stage, Saturday morning in Beijing, China, outside the great hall where the leaders are now meeting. Before we hear from Congressman Pelosi, there's a Chinese idiom that Harry Wu has brought along. It says, if you try to stop water from boiling, it is better to withdraw the firewood from the kettle than to stir it. You believe that this can reinvigorate communist China?
Clinton today is going to just try to stir it, try to cool down the water, but it didn't solve the problem. Senator Biden raised so many questions, so many problems. Weapon proliferation, Indian problem, Pakistan problem.
Obviously, you got to talk about it.
Yes,
right?
and talk and talk. The best way, withdraw the firewood from the kettle.
Meaning?
How do you do that?
Meaning, we want a prosperous, democracy China, not communist China.
You can tell them to change their form of government?
Engage with them by human rights, by principle of the United States, not only money. Okay?
And that's a good question. I guess the whole panel would ask it. How?
Restrain. Give them no free lunch. Today we give them free lunch.
In other words, be the tough guy.
Should be.
All right, Congressman Pelosi, what do you make of that?
Well, I'd like to make a couple of points, three in particular. First of all, one of the comments that was made that said it was 9 years since Tiananmen and to assume that nothing has happened since that time. It doesn't matter how long as the prisoners are arrested who spoke peacefully at that time and are still incarcerated. That's the point the president has to make. He can't just talk about personal freedom in China. He has to talk about June 4th, and that's what we have to watch to see if he says next week. Now, Senator Biden very accurately listed a litany of concerns that we have to deal with China, and most of those problems are of China's own making. China proliferated weapons of mass destruction to Pakistan, helped them build their nuclear program and their ballistic missile program, and now we're saying now we need to give away the store to them so they help us in South Asia. They should be doing that responsibly anyway. In terms of trade, under President Clinton's watch alone, because of his ignoring and turning a blind eye to their unfair trade practices, the deficit under his presidency alone will be $250 billion by the end of this year. $1 trillion. In terms of human rights, we're the United States of America. We have to take the lead on this, and Senator Biden was quite correct. We should have done it in a multilateral way at the UN. But let me just make one more point about what Bernie said about the economy, because I've been feeling very neglected out here in San Francisco the last 2 rounds. Yes, Bernie, normally economic reform can lead to political reform. It has in Taiwan, it has in South Korea, much, much smaller countries than China. But it will happen only if the government will allow it to happen. Before his visit to the United States, President Jiang Zemin said economic reform and political conformity are compatible. Actually, some of this trade increases tightens the noose that the regime has around its people, and I think that for that reason the president has to stand tall and send a message to the Chinese people that while he's respectfully observing their traditions in welcoming a leader in Tiananmen Square, etc., observing the troops with their bayonets and the sound of shots in the square being very eerie, I think, nonetheless he will speak out and disassociate himself from that regime in respect to June 4th. Otherwise, Harry Wu said it best when he said, otherwise President Clinton will be joining them on the wrong side of history.
I think that we should really step back and take, I was a history major, and I think you should take an historical perspective on this problem. Make no mistake about it. The government in Beijing of the People's Republic of China has a dilemma. How does it permit political reform yet retain control? The two are contradictory. And in the fullness of time, if China to become the economic power she wants to become, you're going to have to loosen the reins. You'll get steady, not to anybody's satisfaction, but you'll get a progression towards reforms and more rights. But it's going to take time, and nobody will be satisfied with the pace. Nobody.
We'll take a break. Very well said. We'll get Chai Ling's thoughts as we resume our panel right after this. We're looking at Chenong Avenue outside there's Tiananmen Square on this muggy Saturday morning in China. 9 years ago, this is what it looked like. Chai Ling, can you see this?
Yes, very much so.
What was happening here?
Well, the young man, like thousands of innocent students and citizens at that night, did exactly what we chose to do, risk our life to stop the moving tanks and to say no, enough is enough for the regime. We want democracy now.
And Larry, you remember that before the massacre started, the people of the streets had actually stopped truck convoys of soldiers and saying, you are our sons, and some of the soldiers are sitting in the back of their trucks actually crying. and accepting flowers and talking to the people, and the people in the streets actually managed to persuade some of the convoys to turn around and leave the area, which gave the Chinese Army Command in Beijing a major problem, and they had to go outside the city to bring in forces to put down the pro-democracy people.
Wolf, are there any open protests in Beijing at all about this trip, or people criticizing, as we would see in America, signs?
If there are, Larry, we certainly have not seen any protests at all. We've seen a lot of streets lined with people as the president's motorcade goes by, whether in Xi'an or whether here in Beijing. We have not seen any formal protests. We've only seen a lot of curious onlookers, Larry. In fact, one of the stark images that I've noticed, that even as thousands of people have lined the motorcade, the routes, the streets, even where you've seen them, they have not come with signs or anything. In fact, they're not applauding. They're just sort of standing there looking in curiosity as the American president is there. But certainly, we have not seen any public demonstrations of anger, and at the same time, we haven't seen any great celebrations either.
Larry?
No cheers. Yeah, Bernie, quickly, and then I want to hear from everyone before we close it up.
A quick question to you. If you were a Chinese citizen in Beijing, would you hold up a placard denouncing the government?
Knowing me, I probably would, but maybe a little sign. Good question, Bernie. We'll take a break and come back with closing comments from each of our guests. Don't go away. We thank Wolf Blitzer for joining us, and he'll be following this scene for the next 7-8 days throughout China with reports. A lot of these will be occurring late at night. We'll be featuring highlights in the morning. But if you want to stay up late, it'll be a good idea, because in a couple of hours we're going to hear from the president and the Chinese president as well. From our panel, Harry, some final thoughts. Is the president going to come out tough?
I don't think so. Maybe verbally, yeah, should be, because the pressure from domestic and United States is very tough. Larry, I hope one day I can go back to over there.
You would go back?
Yes. I want to walk on the Tiananmen Square, and without the Chinese Communist flag and without the Tiananmen portrait on the Tiananmen Gate.
Ling, do you want to go back?
Absolutely. You know, in fact, it takes only 9 years for Taiwan to move from dictatorship to democracy. Back 9 years ago, had the Tiananmen massacre avoided not happened, today President Clinton is going to visit a democratic society. Wouldn't that be better? So I do not believe economic will lead to political reform, period. You have to start both.
Senator Biden, you said it's one step at a time. Will we make a step this trip?
I think we'll make one of the steps. And Larry, look, let me remind you about the Soviet Union. This guy, the present Chinese leadership, reminds me of Gorbachev, pretending that he can have it both ways. It can't be done both ways. We should be relentless in our pursuit of human rights and pursuit of our mutual interest at the same time. It didn't take long, ultimately, for the Soviet Union to fall. Every president engaged the Soviet Union. We should engage the same way, tough.
Senator Biden, I agree with you. Jiang Zemin possible become a Gorbachev, but we have to play very smart, play tough.
Nancy, what happens?
Well, I think that if the President of the United States makes a clear, sends a clear message that we in this country identify with the aspirations of the Chinese people, for them to speak freely and choose their own form of government, whatever it is, then there's something to be salvaged from this trip. There are not going to be any dramatic agreements signed. We're told this is about atmospherics. Let those atmospherics leave the message and the flavor that the United States of America, as we did with Eastern Europe and in the Soviet Union and all places in the world, that we support those who identify with our own founding fathers' message, and that hopefully I don't believe in trickle-down liberty, that economic reform leads to political reform, but I do believe that, that this trip, since it is taking place, and that Chinese have cut the president no slack. They didn't let 3 Radio Free Asia reporters on the plane. They rounded up the dissidents in Xi'an and other places. They arrested the Roman Catholic bishop who is loyal to Rome and not the Patriotic Church of Beijing, whatever. And they've cut him no slack. They've made him be received in Tiananmen Square, on the edge of Tiananmen Square. When President Jiang came to the United States, he wrote the terms for his visit. And he's doing the same thing for President Clinton's visit to China. So let the president speak freely in China. Let's let the president have the courage of the lone man before the tank. And hopefully the Chinese regime will allow that message to be heard by the most important audience of all, the Chinese people.
Bernie Shaw, do you feel a Gorbachevian aspect to this?
I was applauding when Joe Biden was speaking, Senator Biden was making his remarks. Every panelist, the last remarks made by Congresswoman Pelosi, everybody on your program tonight, Larry, has made very important points in this very complex situation. And what Senator Biden said, the Chinese have to know, indeed they already know, you cannot play the industrialized game and ignore the rules of that game. And I still go back to something that happened nearly 50 years ago. In 1949, Chairman Mao Zedong stood in that very Tiananmen Square and proclaimed a communist victory by his regime. And now, President Jiang, the man who greeted President Clinton in that area off the square today, President Jiang is presiding over the very slow but historic changing of what Mao proclaimed 50 years ago. It's taken 50 years, but I think that is very impressive progress.
Harry, do you think you'll step foot on that soil again?
I think so. In my lifetime,
You
I
will.
have the chance.
Ling, will you? You
I
want
believe-
to, will you?
I believe in my lifetime, Larry, in your lifetime, in every panel's lifetime, we'll see a free China. I believe the effort and struggle towards a free society will be accomplished. I want to congratulate Nancy for her consistent effort helping free the Chinese people. The 1.2 billion people will all thank you for all of your help. And thank you, Larry, again, for sharing the message.
And thank you all for being our guests. Harry Wu, Ling, Senator Joseph Biden, Representative Nancy Pelosi, Wolf Blitzer on the scene, and of course Bernie Shaw. They're here tonight. There 9 years ago tonight. That's tonight's edition of Larry King Live, and we hope you found this both informative and enlightening. And of course CNN cameras will be in Beijing around the clock. Next on The World Today with Joey Chen and Jim Murray, a look at the Supreme Court decision, a major one in 2 cases of sexual harassment.